Assalamu alaikum dear students. This is Safir Hussain back with another lecture for your subject Introduction to English Literature 2, and we have been talking about novels, their definitions, origin, development, major writers of the 18th century, and the kinds of novels that emerged after 18th century. Today we shall look at some elements of English novel in detail, though we have studied them very briefly in some of the previous lectures, but we would inshallah look at the elements one by one. So the major or main elements in an English novel are plot, character, setting, conflict, narration, point of view, and theme. These are 7 or 8 major or main elements in an English novel, and in order to understand and explain a novel, you need to understand all these elements in proper detail and in proper depth of understanding. So today we shall talk about plot only, though conflict is also an element or a part of plot structure or plot of a novel, but as it is one of the major elements, we would discuss it separately. So today we shall discuss the plot and its structure. So plot is, you already know that it is defined as a series or arrangement of events that make up the whole story. So the whole story of any novel, any plot, any piece of writing is made up of certain events, certain happenings, certain occurrings. So a novel is basically a story, and what the story is made up of, a story is usually made up of certain events. Someone does something, someone says something, someone thinks something, and all these actions, all these thoughts, their words make up the whole story. And these actions, these events are, when they are arranged in a proper form, that arrangement or series is referred to as plot. And plot has been said to be the soul or foundation of a novel by critics. And usually the events or the happenings, the occurrings, they follow a specific pattern or sequence in a normal or usual plot. But we have different patterns, or we may have unconventional or untraditional patterns or sequence of events in the plots of various novels as well. And the events or the occurrings, the happenings, the incidents and the accidents, whatsoever is there, all of them must be related to each other. So there would not be any event in a novel which is completely unrelated to the story or to the collective story of the novel. So plot is the arrangement of events. It is the main element or main foundation pillar or soul of a story. The events that make up the plot, they follow a specific pattern. Sometimes they follow chronological order or some other orders as well. And all the events mentioned in a story that make up the plot are related to each other, they are linked to each other, and they help in the development of the story. So unrelated events, they will not contribute towards the whole story, and they will not be mentioned in a plot. Now the plot is also divided into certain elements or certain parts, and a plot is generally divided into 4 pieces. The first one is introduction, then we have rising action, we have climax, we have falling action, and we have the resolution or ending. So these make up 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 main parts of the plot structure. The first one is exposition or introduction. So this part, the exposition, exposes us to the main story, the main conflict, and the main characters and the settings. Exposition or introduction is usually the beginning of a story of a novel. And in the exposition, the characters and settings are established. we get to know when we begin a novel. The beginning portion is usually the exposition, where we get to know the characters, where the characters are there, we can read about them, and we also get to know the settings of the story. And the conflict is also introduced. We would talk about conflict in a different lecture, but you can, for the time being, you can say that the conflict is the main problem in the story of the novel, or the main problem in the plot. So for example, I could not mention, or I could not write complete introduction of a novel here, or the exposition of a novel. So I have made up a short story for you, and I have written it in pieces so that you might understand the different parts in the structure of a plot. So the story begins as: once upon a time there was a kind king ruling over a vast empire located to the north of the world. So this sentence sets up the setting of the story. That once upon a time means this story belongs to a very far future time, past time, and this story might have happened hundreds of years earlier. And the main character is introduced here as well, who is a king, and he is a kind king. So these are certain attributes related to the king. And we also get to know the place that the story has happened in a vast empire which is located to the north of the world. The king had 4 daughters, but he had no son. So we are also introduced to some other characters apart from the main character, who is the king. Though his last daughter was very wise and caring, but still he could not give up the thoughts of not having a son. So here the conflict, or the main problem, is introduced, that the son had daughters, but he had no son, and he was anxious, he was looking for a son. So this is the main problem, or the conflict in the story. He was so anxious to have a son that he announced if any doctor could help him, he would give half his empire in reward. So you can see that the main conflict, or the problem was of the king having not a son, and he wanted a son. So this is the beginning. The beginnings of novels are not usually like this. This is a very simple beginning, but you would see the main characters in the beginnings, exposition of a novel, the settings, and the conflict, or the main problem in the exposition, or the beginning of the plot. The second element in the plot structure is rising action. And in this part, main story and actions begin to unfold. The main story starts to grow, and main actions occur. Whatever events are there in the story, the main events will happen in the rising action part of the plot. And in this part, characters are also established. We get to know which character is which, and what are his or her characteristics, what are his or her ambitions, what are his or her thoughts. Is he or she a bad character, a positive character? Is he a main character, or a smaller sub character, minor character, etc.? So characters are also established. And in rising action, events begin to get complicated. In the first part, in the exposition, we are just being introduced to the conflict, or the main problem. We do not have main actions or main events of the story here, but the main events of the story, they begin to happen in this portion, which is known as rising action. And excitement and tension and crisis is also developed in the rising action in this part of the plot. So we can look at the example here, the continuation of the example from the previous slide. So one doctor came to the court and asked the king to take some herbs daily for a week. Another asked for some special kind of flour to be crushed and its juice to be mixed in the water and drunk. And others came with many other ideas, but none of it worked. So you can see the tension is growing for the king, and the conflict or the problem is not being solved here, and there are actions and events are getting complicated here. The king was getting frustrated day by day. All of his daughters were observing these events with sad eyes, thinking that the king does not consider them important in his life. So we can see the characters are also being established, that the daughters are feeling sad because of the events which are happening, and the king is also he seems to be neglecting and ignoring his daughters, etc. So this would be termed as the rising action. Then the main point of the plot, the main element in the structure of the plot is the climax. Climax, or the peak point, or the main point, or the turning point of the plot. And this climax is the moment of highest interest and emotion. The emotions, the interest, the confusion, or the excitement, the suspense will be at the highest point in this part, and the readers or the reader will be wondering, he would be thinking what will happen next, etc. So in the example we have, when all doctors tried their tips and tricks, and none of them worked for the king furiously ordered all of them to be thrown into prison. So you can see the interest and the emotion, the action is getting towards its peak. As the king was about to return to his room from the court, one of his daughters came forward and announced that she could help the king. Again, another moment of greater suspense. All the courtiers, the king, the doctors were taken aback. All of them were shocked to hear that one of the daughters of the king is saying that she could help the king. She asked the king to spend some hours daily with all of his daughters for a fortnight. A fortnight is 2 weeks actually. Amazed, the king agreed. After a fortnight, everyone was again gathered at the court. All the daughters were also there, and the king, who was sitting on his throne, had been completely silent for many minutes. So you can see the tension is almost has risen to the peak. Everyone was fearing for the fate of the youngest daughter, the daughter who had claimed that I can help you. Everyone was thinking that now this daughter is in danger. They were unsure what will happen next. So the reader is also thinking what will happen next. Even the characters in the story are also thinking and wondering what will happen next. So this is the point of climax. This is the main peak turning point of the plot. And then we have falling action. And in falling action, what happens? Events and complications begin to resolve. The problem is getting towards its solution, and the story is winding up. It's coming to its conclusion, and the results are you can expect that what the results of the story should be. So the example continues as, finally the king spoke. I have been unfortunate to have ignored my daughters all these years. I thought I needed a son, but in the past 2 weeks I found out that what I needed was love and care of my children. My daughters, I'm very regretful for ignoring you, and I publicly apologize for it today. So you can see the conflict is resolved, and the story is coming towards the conclusion, and the complications, the confusion, and the intensity of emotion, the suspense that was there in the last part of the plot, in the climax, now the tension is resolved. And when the tension is resolved, when the story is coming to conclusion, we would definitely come to the ending or resolution of the story or the plot. And this part is actually the ending or conclusion of the story. And usually stories either end happily, or they have tragic endings, or sometimes the stories may have tragicomic endings where there will be some elements of tragedy and some elements of comedy, some happy and some sad elements. So the ending of the story that I had created for you for this lecture is that all his daughters and people in the court were smiling with tears in their eyes, because they were relieved, and they saw that the conclusion has arrived. The king and his daughters lived happily ever after, and they led their lives happily together after that story forever. So this is the ending of the story, and you can see the ending here is a happy ending for the story, and this would be the last part of the plot. So there are five elements in the plot structure: exposition or introduction. This is the beginning. Characters and settings are established. Conflict or main problem is introduced. Then we have rising action. The events are getting complicated. Characters are established. The main story begins to grow and unfold, and excitement and tension is starting to grow. And in climax, the excitement and tension grows to the maximum point, and climax is the main point and the moment of highest interest and intense emotion. And then we have falling action, where the story is coming to conclusion, the events and complications begin to resolve, and the story is getting to towards its end, and the end is termed as the resolution, where the story ends and it either ends happily or tragically. Thank you very much.